The colonial period in North America, stretching from the establishment of Jamestown in 1607 to the Declaration of Independence in 1776, was a time marked by intense conflict and warfare. Among the earliest and most significant clashes was the First Anglo-Powhatan War, waged between the Powhatan Confederacy and English settlers from 1609 to 1614. This conflict, ignited by disputes over land, resources, and deep cultural divides, became a pivotal moment in early American history. As tensions escalated, both sides fought fiercely for control, culminating in events such as the infamous Starving Time for the English and the resistance led by Chief Powhatan. The war drastically shifted the dynamic between Native Americans and European settlers, setting a precedent for future interactions. But what exactly sparked this conflict? How did it reshape the relationship between the Powhatan people and the English settlers? And what enduring legacy did the First Anglo-Powhatan War leave on the development of the New World? Stay with us as we delve into the full story of the First Anglo-Powhatan War, examining its causes and exploring how it came to an end. If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell to stay updated. We appreciate your support. Historically, indigenous communities like the Powhatan were known for their patience. Yet, after enduring years of English aggression and perceived disrespect, the Powhatans decided that the limited benefits of trade with the colonists did not outweigh the conflicts it brought. Thus, 1609 marked the beginning of open hostilities. The war was characterized by sporadic violence, with each side following vastly different rules of engagement. But to understand the war itself, we must first explore the events that led to it. The indigenous people of Senacomoco, the broader Powhatan territory, had encountered Europeans before. In 1570, Don Luis de Velasco, a Powhatan who had traveled on a Spanish ship and converted to Catholicism, returned to Chesapeake Bay with Jesuit missionaries. In a shocking turn of events, he later led a raid that killed nearly all of the missionaries. Additionally, during the harsh winter of 1585 to 1586, Englishmen from the ill-fated Roanoke colony made contact with the Chesapeake tribes. And the elusive lost colony of Roanoke may have later integrated with these or other nearby tribes. By the time the English established their fort at Jamestown in 1607, they chose their location with defense in mind, not against the Powhatan but the Spanish. Unaware of the challenges they would soon face from the indigenous inhabitants. Powhatan, the paramount chief of the Powhatan Confederacy, initially had bigger concerns than the small band of English soldiers settling at Jamestown. With the powerful Monacan people residing beyond the fall line, his attention was divided. Instead of eradicating the settlers outright, Powhatan chose a more strategic approach, aiming to learn about these newcomers. While he arranged a feast for a group of English explorers, he simultaneously ordered an attack on those left behind at Jamestown, likely to gauge their tactics and weaponry. Observing their reactions, Gabriel Archer noted how quickly the indigenous warriors learned to keep their distance from musket range, while the colonists grew wary of ambushes from tall grass and sudden arrow attacks. Captain George Percy nicknamed Powhatan the subtle old fox, a title that Powhatan well earned. He assured the English that he would protect them, feigning innocence over the attacks, which left the settlers questioning whether they were at war or peace, dealing with a friend or a foe. In December 1607, Powhatan's younger brother, or possibly close relative, Optionakana captured John Smith during a communal hunt and delivered him to Werowocomoco, Powhatan's main settlement on the York River. According to the famed legend, Pocahontas saved Smith's life during this encounter. However, many historians now believe Smith may have undergone an adoption ritual, a diplomatic act intended to integrate him into Powhatan's chiefdom. Powhatan offered Smith the title of Werowan's chief of Capahosic, a village near Werowocomoco, perhaps to keep him within reach. Smith, however, refused, affirming his loyalty to King James of England. Later in 1608, Smith and Captain Christopher Newport attempted to impose English authority by awkwardly crowning Powhatan as a subject of the English king. Powhatan accepted their gifts but soon thereafter severed trade with the English. Meanwhile, harsh weather exacerbated the already tense relationship. The Jamestown colonists arrived in Virginia during the early phase of a devastating 7-year drought from 1606 to 1612, the driest period in 770 years, with brutal winters compounding their struggles. Corn, a crucial staple, was scarce, and the settlers, ill-prepared and largely unwilling to adapt to self-sufficiency, found themselves in dire straits. Supplies from England were insufficient, and attempts to control Powhatan's tribute system, much as the Spanish had done in South America, proved futile. Malnutrition and disease ravaged the colony, and it was only through the Powhatan's initial gifts of food that Jamestown survived its first 2 years. Yet, as the drought persisted, John Smith turned to aggressive tactics, bargaining, and even outright theft to secure corn. When Powhatan ceased trading, it pushed Jamestown to the brink. In May 1609, the Crown issued the Virginia Company of London a second charter and sent a fleet laden with new colonists and supplies. However, the flagship sea venture was presumed lost at sea, along with the colony's fresh leadership. This sudden vacuum led to political chaos in Jamestown, with President John Smith struggling against both internal dissent and the looming threat of famine. Desperate to ease the situation, he dispatched 2 groups of soldiers to find sustenance. One group, led by Captains George Percy and John Martin, journeyed downriver to meet with the Nansemond Indians. After 2 English messengers disappeared, the group responded by attacking a nearby settlement, burning homes, plundering temples, and desecrating tombs. Percy later recounted how they seized pearls, copper, and decorative items from royal burial sites, enraging the indigenous community and resulting in the deaths of half of Percy and Martin's 100 men. Another expedition, led by Francis West and accompanied by a well-connected 14-year-old named Henry Spelman, ventured upriver to negotiate with Parahunt, one of Powhatan's brothers, for control over the village of Powhatan. Unwilling to surrender his homeland and its ripe cornfields, Parahunt's warriors fought back fiercely, inflicting heavy losses on the English, costing West half of his 120 men. A fragile truce emerged only after Spelman was sent to live among Parahunt's people, a move Spelman would later describe as being sold to the chief by Smith. The brutal confrontations along both ends of the James River, combined with the English challenging the sovereignty of a town as symbolic as Powhatan, culminated in outright war. After John Smith left the colony in October 1609, young Henry Spelman traveled to Jamestown in November with an invitation from Powhatan, urging the English to visit his new capital at Oripax. However, instead of engaging in peaceful trade, the English, led by Captain John Ratcliffe, walked into a deadly ambush. Approximately 33 men, 2/3 of the party, were killed. Ratcliffe suffered a particularly gruesome fate, being skinned alive with mussel shells. Horrified by these events, Spelman fled from Powhatan's lands to live among the Potawatomis. In the wake of this disaster, the remaining colonists retreated to Jamestown, where Powhatan ordered a complete blockade of the settlement. The warriors cut off trade and access to nearby woods, depriving the English of crucial hunting and foraging grounds. Although not a siege in the traditional sense, this strategy effectively sealed the colony's fate. Recognizing the futility of direct confrontation with English muskets, Powhatan instead relied on starvation as his weapon. This was his best chance to expel the English from Sennacomoco. The winter of 1609 to 1610 became known as the starving time, during which the 240 men, women, and children at Jamestown were reduced to eating snakes, rats, cats, dogs, and even their own dead. By May 1610, only about 60 colonists had survived. Remarkably, on May 24, the Sea Venture survivors arrived from Bermuda, where they had endured 10 months after their shipwreck. William Strachey, one of the new arrivals, later wrote of the harrowing famine and pestilence he encountered at Jamestown, describing it as more than he could bear to express. Faced with the devastation, Sir Thomas Gates ordered an evacuation, but as they sailed down the James River, they encountered a supply ship carrying the new governor, Thomas West, Baron de la Warre, and a year's worth of provisions. De la Warre's arrival marked a turning point in the First Anglo-Powhatan War. His leadership, combined with a renewed resolve for retribution, fueled the English colonists' sense of a holy war. Rumors circulated that Powhatan had ordered the death of lost English colonists, likely to assert his dominance, further escalating hostilities. De la Warr and Lieutenant Governor Gates brought instructions from the Virginia Company to capture Powhatan and eliminate his Quioco Sucks, or priests, whom the English believed had advised Powhatan to eradicate the remnants of the Roanoke colony. They also planned to redirect indigenous tribute to the English, while converting Powhatan's people to Christianity, particularly focusing on educating indigenous children in English customs. Discipline among the colonists became paramount, setting the stage for a protracted and bloody conflict that would reshape the region. To restore order, Sir Thomas Gates introduced a strict code of conduct for the colony's military personnel. These rules, later edited and published by William Strachey as the Laws Divine, Moral and Martial in 1612, were notoriously harsh. In 1611, Sir Thomas Dale expanded them, resulting in a backlash in England over their severity. Punishments were often brutal. A man accused of stealing food, for instance, could be tied to a tree and left to starve. Nevertheless, these draconian measures temporarily stabilized a colony that had been teetering on the edge of collapse. On July 9, 1610, the English launched a brutal counteroffensive against the Powhatan. During the starving time, around 30 colonists had been stationed with ample provisions at Fort Algernon near the mouth of the James River. The nearby Kecoughtan Indians had left them undisturbed, but now, as George Percy later remarked with irony, the English sought revenge. Using a drummer to mimic a traditional Powhatan greeting, they lured the Kecoughtan warriors to the riverbank and then launched a surprise attack. According to Percy, the English inflicted extraordinary large and mortal wounds, making it remarkable that any Kecoughtan survived. Not long after, a group of Paspac warriors, whose lands bordered Jamestown, attacked the fort's blockhouse. In retaliation, a force led by Captains Percy, John Davis, and William West struck back against the Paspac town, killing 15 to 16 people, burning homes and seizing their corn stores. The wife and children of Warowans Wowanchapunk were captured, but Percy noted that his soldiers began to murmur because the queen and her children had been spared while other captives were killed. In a grim council, it was decided to execute the children, who were thrown overboard and shot in the water. As the group returned to Jamestown, the children's mother was also put to death. Likely under the direction of Captain John Davis, the English continued their aggressive campaign. The Warraskoyak and the Chickahominies, who were not part of Powhatan's confederacy, also fell victim to English attacks. After the Warraskoyaks fled, the English torched 2 of their villages and seized the remaining corn. The tactics the English used during the First Anglo-Powhatan War, as historian Faust describes, were honed in Ireland and brought to Virginia. Deception, ambush, indiscriminate killing, and the calculated destruction of villages were all methods new to North America. While indigenous warfare could be brutal, it often involved restraints aimed at limiting violence. Conflicts tended to be personal, avenging specific grievances, and the capture of prisoners was preferred. Prisoners symbolized victory and could be adopted into tribes, traded, or ransomed. These cultural norms discouraged the sort of unrestrained violence the English unleashed, which sometimes spared chiefs, women, and children. As the war escalated, however, these customary limits eroded. English accounts of Powhatan warriors calling upon their god, Oki, suggest that both sides began to view the conflict as a holy war. In November 1610, Governor de la Warr dispatched an expedition of about 200 men, including miners, toward the falls of the James River. Initially, they suffered a defeat at the hands of Appomattox Werowanskwa, the female chief Oposunkwanoski. The English retaliated by destroying the Appomattox village and severely wounding the chief. The drummer, who had previously lured the Kecoughtans with a deceptive greeting, barely escaped the Appomattox warriors' determined efforts to kill him. In the relentless back and forth of the First Anglo-Powhatan War, Governor de la Warr's nephew, William West, and Paspac Warowans Wowanchapunk were both killed. By early 1611, the Powhatans briefly regained momentum. They pushed the colonists back from the falls, and on March 28, de la Warr departed for the West Indies, leaving George Percy in command until the new deputy governor, Sir Thomas Dale, arrived. Sensing another power vacuum, as they had after John Smith's departure, the Powhatans, led by Paspac warriors seeking revenge, attacked the Jamestown blockhouse. Percy recounted that arrows fell as thick as hail, killing the entire garrison of 20 men. Despite their success, the Powhatans refrained from attacking the main fort, missing a critical chance to end the conflict. In May, Sir Thomas Dale took charge, bringing with him a fierce sense of discipline and strategy. He reinforced the harsh laws divine, moral, and martial and followed the stern advice of Richard Hakluyt, who urged, "If gentle polishing will not serve, then we shall not want hammers and rough masons to prepare them to our preachers' hands." In June, Dale led 100 armored soldiers against the Nansemans at the river's mouth, burning their villages. By September, bolstered by reinforcements, the English pressed upriver and established the settlement of Henricus. From this strategic position, Dale launched new offensives, decisively defeating the Appomattox by December. Dale's aggressive tactics left Powhatan in a precarious position, trapped between English strongholds on both ends of the river and non-Algonquian-speaking Monacan tribes beyond the falls. For the next 2 years, the elderly chief could only lie low, his authority visibly waning as English plantations sprung up along the James despite ongoing resistance. Meanwhile, Captain Samuel Argall ventured north into the vulnerable reaches of Sennacomoco, forging an alliance with the Potawatomis, who welcomed trade due in part to the influence of Henry Spelman. Having fled Powhatan in 1609, Spelman had grown into a reliable interpreter, now serving as a link between Argall and Iopacis, the Warowans of the Potawatomic town of Passapatanzi. This alliance yielded an unexpected prize. In April 1613, Argall learned that Pocahontas was staying in Passapatanzi. With a combination of military threats and promises of a profitable partnership, Argall convinced Iopacis to help him kidnap Pocahontas, capturing a valuable prisoner in a way reminiscent of indigenous customs. Spelman himself embodied the complex entanglement of identities and loyalties in this conflict, straddling the line between native and English. War and peace. A few years later, Henry Spelman narrowly escaped execution after being accused of speaking ill of the English to Opechancanough. Following treaties with the Accomics and Okahanics on the eastern shore, Captain Samuel Argall and Sir Thomas Dale attempted to leverage Pocahontas to extract concessions from her father, Powhatan. However, Powhatan stalled for a year. Finally, in March 1614, Dale, Argall, and 150 English soldiers, with Pocahontas in tow, ventured deep into Pamunkey territory, the domain of Opechancanough and the fiercest warriors of Sennacomoco. At present-day West Point, where the York and Mattapony rivers converge, they confronted several hundred Powhatan warriors. After 2 days of tense standoff, neither side fired a shot, and the English withdrew, bringing the First Anglo-Powhatan War to an anticlimactic close. Ironically, the war, which had begun with a cultural exchange as young Henry Spelman went to live with the Warowans Parahunt, now ended with another exchange. This time, it was Pocahontas, Powhatan's daughter, who chose to remain among the English. During the uneasy peace of 1612 to 1613, Pocahontas converted to Christianity. In April 1614, she declared her intention to marry John Rolfe, a survivor of the Sea Venture wreck. Powhatan consented, and this union temporarily secured peace between the English and the Powhatans. While Pocahontas passed away in England in 1617, and Powhatan died a year later, their marriage allowed the English to expand their settlements far beyond Jamestown. With Rolfe's introduction of a profitable tobacco strain, plantations proliferated along the James River, as the Powhatans bided their time. Though Opechancanough did not immediately inherit the title of Mamanatowick, his role as Warowans of the Pamunkey made him the de facto leader of the last stronghold in Sennacomoco. The English interpreted Pocahontas' conversion as a signal that the Powhatans were prepared to abandon their customs. And even Opechancanough seemed to show interest in conversion. As Hakluyt had once predicted, the English believed their hammer and rough masons had prepared the indigenous people for the hands of English preachers. But on March 22, 1622, Opechancanough shattered this illusion. His warriors launched a sudden and brutal attack on the colony, sparking the Second Anglo-Powhatan War. And with that, we conclude today's episode. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest content.